Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my Stories of Scale podcast, hosted by me, Jonathan Herps. In the podcast, I chat with business owners and CEOs of scaling companies. It centers around their entrepreneurial journey so far and their aspirations for their companies and themselves. Today, I'm speaking with Daniel McDuall. I'm sorry, Daniel. I hope I've got that close to being right.
That's
And
fine. Yep.
Daniel is the CEO and founder of Squizify. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So listen, tell me a little bit about your origin story. What are the key moments that led to where you are today? And can you tell me a bit about your business?
Yeah, look, thanks. I was actually not a native Australian. I was born a Kiwi in Dunedin in New Zealand. And so don't hold that against me. But I've been over here for 20 years now. And so what brought me over here originally was just a change of scenery. I was in my early 20s and looking for something new in life. And I came to Australia and yeah, I've loved it ever since. And my journey started relatively early in the entrepreneurship space. Once I left high school, I actually have never had a PAYG job. I've always been either a contractor or a self-employed in some capacity. And so entrepreneurship has been something that sort of always gravitated towards. And so early days over in Australia, I had a few sales roles. I formed a recruitment company. And then I got into franchising and bought a QSR brand, Red Rooster, here in Australia. I started with one store, brought and sold a number of stores to the point where I had multiple franchises across southeast Queensland. Now, the franchising is a great opportunity if you're an entrepreneur to test the waters without being completely on your own. A franchise model enables you to work within the parameters, but still be your own boss. And I really enjoyed that time, and it was a really exciting time. I learned a lot, but there was always that sort of other chip on the shoulder to say, "Hey, look, can I actually get out there and do it on my own?" And within that hospitality role, I came across a gentleman by the name of Matt Milady. He was actually looking to buy some stores, but he'd had exit out of a startup himself. And we got on really well right from the word go and really got into the swing of things around what you could do within the startup space. And he'd had a recent exit from his business, Tamando, and was looking for a new venture. And I'd been trying within the food safety side of things within our restaurants to automate things. I created this really exciting Excel spreadsheet to manage all my stores, food safety. It really, in principle, looked great, but in theory, in practice, sorry, it just didn't work at all. And I spent more time fixing the cells and actually doing the actual managing of the food safety. But that was the genesis of Squizify. It was around how do I actually solve the problem for myself within my restaurants. And so we actually went out to Red Rooster and got commitment from them before we even write the first line of code. So we said to them, look, if we build this, would you guys buy it? And they agreed that it was a great concept and nothing really was in market at the time. And so, yeah, we got them to sign a letter of memorandum of understanding, which in hindsight means absolutely nothing, but it's a bit of paper with a signature on it to say, hey, look, we've got some form of commitment here. But that gave us a chance to go off there and start building. And so we built first line of code end of 2018. Squizify became an MVP and in market around July of 2019. And yeah, we're off to the races. We started.
What does Squizify do?
So Squizify is a digital food safety solution. So it goes into the back of house operations within food venues. So therefore, it gives the owners, the users, the ability to digitize all of their compliance, but we also then incorporate a lot of automation into it. So not just the digitization, but also IoT sensors that enable you to see the temperature of a fridge or a freezer 24/7. We've got Bluetooth probes that capture internal core temperatures of products and oil testers and so on and so forth. So really moving away from that paper-based process into a full digital solution. But the benefit really comes down to the data that gets out of it. So a lot of our users can then take the data that they capture and then use that to then better improve the operations across not just one site, but multiple sites.
And where are you up to now?
So we're up to, look, we've been fortunate that we got through the COVID phase. COVID, we launched as a touched on just before, just a few months before COVID, and that really put the brakes on in regards to that growth. But look, we knew if we kept our gunpowder dry on the other side of COVID, we'd be in a great position, and that turned out to be the case. And so we hit the ground running. We brought on some really big international brands really quickly, which led us down to raising our Series A just recently. So just raised a $10 million round with a American-based VC. And that's really given us the stability and the runway to develop the product further, but more importantly, really double down on that international growth part of it. So we've got offices in Brisbane, Australia, but also Bangkok and Tokyo, and soon to open up in the States. So we've got this really strong growth plan over the next sort of 12 to 24 months. And that's where that sort of Series A will really come to help that.
Congratulations. If
Thanks.
if I can tell you a couple of war stories from my past in franchising, because before we jump a bit further into you, I think the point you made about franchising is a really good one. If you get the right franchise where they've built the right systems, built the right, it makes it very easy to fall into the CEO space.
Yeah.
But having said that, my two fun stories was going back many years when I was a banker, I financed 146 store fit outs for McDonald's. And a fascinating experience because as you would know from Red Rooster and franchising, every piece of equipment in every store is exactly the same. The layout is the same. It's all about building a physical layout to allow the processes and systems that have been outlined by the franchisor to work. And
Yeah.
really impressive. But the second part of that was I thought I should go and become a franchisor, but unfortunately at that stage McDonald's had closed franchisees, which I really regret. But I went and did all the training for Burger King. And the final part of the selection was go and work for 3 days in a Burger King restaurant, which I did in Manly in Sydney.
Yeah.
I came home, my then partner, Rebecca, said to me, if you ever come home smelling like that again, we're leaving. I'm leaving you. And that was the end of my franchise
Yeah.
experiment. Anyway,
Yeah.
hey, so you've just done the Series A. What's the next projects? What do you focus on now? And maybe if you can tell me how you prioritize. And I'd be particularly interested, given you've done the Series A out of the US, exchange rate's just gone through the floor, tariffs, how are you going to deal with that as a part of answering the question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so for us, the next steps, where we've positioned our business is we are purely and wholly solely in the food safety space. And so we're an inch wide, but a mile deep within food safety, which means we don't branch out and do general auditing for other industries or rostering or inventory management like some of our competitors do. We just play purely in that food safety side of things. And so it gives us a chance to be ultra focused on just enhancing and delivering those core values that we have in the platform. How we prioritize future road mapping and features and stuff, it really just comes down to what the customer needs and requirements are. Like we firmly believe if we can continue to add value to the customer, no matter how big or small you are, the customer's going to see that and be very sticky. And so for us, some of the really exciting things we're working on is very much in that AI space. We lend ourselves within food safety and the data that we collect out of it to really use a lot of those AI metrics to drive tremendous value back to the customer and really give them insights into their operations that they've never had access to before. And so we're really excited about some of the AI projects that we've delivered and will continue to deliver moving forward. The tariffs in the States is an interesting one for us at the moment as we import into the States. It works against us. But at the moment, nothing's really transpired just yet. It's still all talk at the stage. And so we'll just have to watch that closely. But we're in the same boat as everyone else as well when it comes to a lot of that. The tide rises or falls depending on what Trump says, but we're all in the same boat when it comes down to that. Look, I'm a big believer. You can only control what you can control, and that sort of stuff there is really out of our hands. So we'll just have to see what comes our way when the time's right.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. One of my clients I was speaking to this morning is potentially going through being acquired. And one of the acquirers is the US business. And as I mentioned, the US dollar has dropped by 20%, which has made the purchase price of my client 20% more expensive in the space of 100 days, which is it's leading to some really interesting risk management strategies and decisions at the moment.
Yeah, I think the market just doesn't like uncertainty, and there's just a lot of uncertainty at the moment. But look, I genuinely believe things will stabilize in the not too distant future, and I think it's just a case of riding those waves and just getting through it. And as I touched on before, if you just focus on your own backyard and control what you can control, I think the rest of it becomes a little bit of noise, and it always has a way of self-leveling itself out at the end of the day.
It's a very important lesson for people to learn. Control what you can control.
Yeah, I find with entrepreneurship and running a business, like there are just so many headwinds and challenges that come on a daily basis. And if you spent the headspace on every single problem trying to solve it, you'll end up going crazy. And so, look, there's a statistic going around saying that 85% of everything you worry about doesn't actually come into fruition. And I've really adopted that philosophy over the years. And if something's coming, I'll worry about it when I get to it. And I think that really holds really strong when it comes down to making key decisions within running your team, particularly around people. I think the idea is if you set the standard, set the tone, people either rise or they'll move on. And you want them to be sticky within the business. But once again, I think if you set those parameters there, it's exciting to see what they can bring to the table. I've recently found that a lot of times with our staff. So we've grown from 3 people 3 years ago to 42 people now. And, there becomes a whole set of challenges with people and the way you manage. My role in particular now has moved from the operational side of things into this man management kind of phase, particularly as we look overseas and bring new people on over there and cultural differences. When we say control, we control, if you can control really effectively your immediate reports and then have the faith and trust in them that they can then pass it down the chain, then you're in such a strong, better position to focus on what you need to focus on as a leader.
It's a really good point. It's one of the things I talk a lot about with my the clients I mentor and coach and their teams is as you start scaling the business, you as the CEO, really you've got three jobs. Firstly, strategy, work it out, and then talk about it until you're literally blue in the face to your stakeholders, to your board, to your employees, to customers, etc. The second one is people, having the best team that you can possibly have that you can afford, and then building the culture around that. And the third one, of course, is having enough cash to fulfill your decisions. And it's interesting as you move from that founder to the real scaling CEO, what you do shrinks dramatically.
You touched on the culture thing before. I think when you're a small team, it's quite hard to have a culture. It's really just relationships you've got with a couple of people. But as you grow, you want to bring people into the fold that not just fit in with the culture that you've created, but you want them to add to the increased value of that culture. They can continually build that culture up. By the time you get to a sizable level, your culture is inbred within everyone. And it's hard culture, to be fair. Like it's a tough one when you've got so many personalities, but I'm a big believer it starts at the top. If I set the standards and set the tone, my direct reports can then do the same. It just makes life a lot easier.
I totally agree. And it's building that team of evangelists around you in many ways when you across multiple cultures. And being Aussies and Kiwis and being a long way away from the rest of the world, I ran a company for 5 years, which had based out of the United Arab Emirates, but we were across 16 countries. And try and manage cultures across 16 countries is such a different dynamic.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Listen, one of the things that my listeners are really interested in are the daily habits or routines that a CEO has. What your typical day might look like. Can you give me an idea?
Well, I've got three young kids, so I think a lot of people can just relate to that straight away. It is interesting. Like we have got something going every day of the week, I think, at school. And so often it means being at school at like 7 a.m. in the morning, which actually works in really well. It gives us a chance to get up around 6, get the kids ready, drop them off at school. Then I can go to the gym for a bit. And then I'm usually in the office about 8:30. But we always start our days across the whole business with our daily huddles. And so at 8:45, we'll jump on and spend 15 minutes. Each department does their own huddle. But we spend 15 minutes and each individual person will jump on and talk about three things. They'll talk about what they're working on for today and why is it important. They'll talk a bit about what a stuck they might have in the business. And if we share that with the group, there might be someone that can help out with that stuck. And then we just pivot at the end and say, look, what's a bit of good news? Doesn't have to be business related, it could be anything, but just what's good news. And that really gets the day off to a great start. And then during that day, it's really just usually packed with meetings. And the idea for my week is trying to block out key moments where I can just have some me time, because when you go from meeting to meeting, often you just never get anything done. And it's really important to block off, usually 3 times a week. I have a 2-hour block where it's just nothing gets done apart from just me doing stuff. And so that's really important, I think. And then the balance with that, and it's something that I actually haven't done very well over the years, is from a kind of founder fitness perspective, is looking after my own health. And I'm getting back into the gym and doing these sort of things, but trying to sleep, trying to drink enough water, trying to get enough exercise. Look, everyone knows that's important, but actually doing it is sometimes a bit of a challenge when you've got quite a few things happening within work. And to be fair, Jonathan, I actually feel guilty sometimes doing stuff just for myself. I feel like I should be back on the tools and doing things for the business because that's the priority. But in reality, it's the complete opposite. And if I don't look after myself, the business suffers. So that's something I've really prioritized over the last 3 to 4 months.
Okay, if I can, I'm going to jump into 2 areas here. One was the daily huddle. I'm assuming you got that from Vern Harnish and Scaling Up.
Yeah, one of my mentors, Anna Samios, does it.
All right. So I started this part of my career as a coach being trained by Vern Harnish, and I'm being a certified scaling up coach. And the daily huddle is something he absolutely, it's one of the most critical, or probably he would argue the most critical meeting of your week. And one point I really want to pick up there was your point about one of the items is where am I stuck? Now, a lot of people think 15 minutes at the start of the day, waste of time, but that one question, where am I stuck, leads to you as the CEO and the leaders being able to plan their day, because it immediately says, where am I stuck? How important is it? do I need to actually get involved as CEO to help fix this thing? And I can schedule it into my day so that you're not forever having that knock on the door saying, hey, boss, can any those interruptions. So worth reading the book Scaling Up. Look at Daily Huddle. If anybody wants a playbook on that, I've got something I can send through. So just throw something in the comments. The other one, your point, Daniel, about feeling guilty is a really interesting one. There is a coach I met while I was with Scaling Up, a Kevin Lawrence, and he is out of Canada, I think. But he wrote a book called Your Oxygen Mask First. It's well worth having a read of because a lot of people talk about this concept of work-life balance. I don't believe there is a such thing from entrepreneurs, work-life
I
balance.
agree. Yeah.
We never switch off. But we try, and I try. I work from home so that like you, though I wish I could get my daughter up at 6 a.m. in the morning, it'd never happen. I might send her up to you. I get the kids out of bed, kick them around a bit until they get their breakfast. I normally make the lunch for them. And because I'm in Barrel, it's a country town, I actually drop them to school most days, which I love because I get to have that conversation. Then I work, then at night I've got the wife and children, etc., etc., etc. But it's and I'm not very good at it. Carving that time out for yourself is so critical and making sure you do. And the way I tend to do it, I go away for maybe a night, a month down to our beach house, and I I have my best ideas when I'm walking by the water or I'm in the shower. But carving that time out for yourself, for hobbies, for your mates, whatever it might be, is super, super critical
Yeah.
because you get burnt out. Women are much better at this than men, it seems to me. And so blocking that stuff in your diary is critical. But anyway, Your Oxygen Mask First, it's a really good book to read.
I think just to add to that, the elements of a founder, like it's very lonely being a founder. I think being an entrepreneur at the top of the tree in your business, you don't have a lot of sometimes people to talk to or avenues to vent. Even your wife, I find my wife, she's brilliant in so many ways, but I couldn't have a detailed conversation around the business because it just would
Yeah.
stress her out, to be fair. But I think it's being mindful of that. Like depression is a really big thing within society. And I think even with founders, you've got such high expectations on delivering to investors, delivering to your team and achieving big things. And if it doesn't always go by the playbook, man, depression can really sink in. And when it hits, they call it the black dog, and it can really affect a lot of people in different ways. I think more than anything, it's just surrounding yourself with the right people. And I mentioned before Anna, one of my mentors, like I've got 4 or 5 different mentors that I talk to, and I know that I can pick up and talk to any of those guys, even 5 minute conversation, and they're just things are in a different perspective, right? And so the one key takeaway I've had over my journey in the last few years is having those people there in your corner that all they do is care about you and don't care about the business as much or what's going else is going on. They just want to make sure that you're right is a really key part.
That's a really good point. One of the things my program I'm changing right now because one thing I tend to do either a mixture of CEO and leadership team coaching, where I speak to the CEO at least once, maybe twice a month, and get together with the leadership team every quarter, or I do one-on-one CEO coaching. But what I'm now doing is putting an emphasis into every Tuesday, and this is launching next week, this program, as it turns out, every Tuesday morning, an hour, call it off office hours, where I'm just going to be sitting on Zoom, and anybody can call in and say, hey, Jonathan, got this problem, whatever it might be. Once a month, I've got now having a 90-minute to 2 hours CEO only, where I bring my clients together to talk about anything. I'll present on something for half an hour that's topical, and then we're there as a team to help each other. And every quarter, I bring my CEOs together for essentially a pissy lunch, where we give them the opportunity to learn from each other. It's like fascinating this morning, the call I had with my client who is potentially being acquired. And he has been, and you've just been through the Series A, so you'll get this. The amount of time he and his CFO had to spend on that and the doubts and the concerns. And I was joking with the CFO, you've just been through a doctorate in finance and law and everything all in one go. But having someone to talk to, they just made the comment, having me there every fortnight was a critical thing for them to talk them through the ups and downs. Because
Look, on to you, mate, because it is a big thing. And I think having that avenue for founders and anyone listening now is even just one person, and it could only be a 5 minute chat, but
yeah,
I don't know, personal experience, I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, exactly right. And even being pushed in the right direction to a certain book on negotiation or whatever it might be, just to help get over. It's a very good point you make. So tell me about one of your biggest failures or one of your biggest challenges. Can you share something about it? What did you learn? How did you overcome?
Oh, look, probably one of the biggest challenges we have, and look, I think we'll probably continue to have this, is just around surrounding it. Like my main goal as a CEO now and a founder is around making sure that I can retain the top talent in my team, but also attract top talent into the team. And so you do have some wins and losses when it comes down to that. It's really hard sometimes to always nail it when it comes down to hiring people. So I think probably the challenge of the past is hiring too quickly and then taking too long to get rid of them. And that's really had flow-on effects in other parts of the business. So I think that kind of mentality of hire slow, fire fast is really important. The near-death experience that we've had, and look, I think most businesses go through this probably every 6 months, is that something pops up, and obviously with COVID, and now you've got tariffs, you got all the world is very uncertain. There's all these near-death experiences coming up in your business. Now we had one around cash flow and just making sure that we had enough runway to survive, and like we've got some really big contracts coming in, but and at the time, and if they don't pay on time or there's a delay or something happens, you just got to make sure that you've got enough cash in the bank to survive that. And so that was probably my learning early on, was just making sure that things might be great now. What does it look like in 6 months' time? And are you preparing yourself for that? Because we took close to 7 months from start to finish to raise our Series A. And we had a lot of interest early on. I thought this was going to be plain sailing. And to be fair, at the start, it was great. And then towards the pointy end, it just dragged on and on. And so you just had to be mindful of having those contingencies in place, because with that cash, yeah, it's the oxygen of your business. It makes it really hard to do anything when you're running low or running out.
What's your rule of thumb, Daniel, on how much cash to have on hand?
Oh, look, this is, I've got asked this question a fair bit. I think in a perfect world, everyone says, 3 years would be wonderful. The reality is that doesn't happen. And early on, you're living month by month nearly some stages. Now, the amount of times I've woken up in cold sweats at 2 o'clock in the morning because I don't know how I'm going to pay payroll next week. It was more times than I'll be, like to remember. But I think as you raise a Series A, for us, we've got very much a 3-year roadmap in place. But we know that we need to spend that capital and deploy that capital in a really effective way. And 3 years is our long-term view of it. But I think anything longer than that is probably too long. And anything short of that, then welcome to startup world. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. And your story of that journey is so typical. One of the things that we work on with my clients, and normally it's after they've had the shock, the point you've made, a lot of it comes in Australia and New Zealand because of our summer holidays. Sales team hits its targets in November, takes its foot off the accelerator. Suddenly we get to January and there's no cash coming in, or the technical team aren't in a position to deliver anything because there's no work to be done. And suddenly this, and typical client of mine, they work towards 3 months, 6 months, and then start growing that balance, but with a mixture of cash in the bank and line of credit. And the other rule of thumb that most of the clients use is if we're bringing on a new senior leader, really they've got to be able to pay their way, including recruitment, within 3 months of starting. And that's the rule of thumb. So they have an investment account they draw down to hire or make the investment, but they're looking for a 90 to 120 day payback on the costs of bringing someone on board.
Yeah. One thing I would say around fundraising is, as a founder, you should always be in fundraising mode, regardless of what status you're in. And so even for us, it's only 6 weeks or so since we raised. I'm already putting the decks together for what a Series B would look like. And it's not so much around we need the capital, but have everything ready to go. So if someone does pop out of the blue or something happens, you're not going to take a week to get all the documentation together. And so we've got a mandate now that we'll get it. We've obviously done it all with the Series A, but now it's just a maintenance kind of process to keep that documentation up to date. And we're not looking to raise, and hopefully it's another 2, maybe 3 years before we will. But if something came up in 3 months' time, we would be ready to capitalize on that as well. So I think that's just the mindset a founder needs to be very cognizant of.
You're right. I think that's great advice. And classic example of as the flywheel gets going and really starting to wrap things up, out of the blue, a contract. One of my clients recently, a major hospital provide capital equipment in hospitals. A major hospital came out of left field and said, "We want you to provide." It turned out to be about $9 million worth of capital equipment, and it just came out of left field. But growth sucks cash, so to have that line of credit and everything else with the cash in the bank ready to go,
Yeah.
meant that they were able to capital. I can imagine if McDonald's came to you today and said, "We want you to put Squizify in every store around the world," and that's going to cost you a lot of cash.
Mate, we're actually in that situation. Not, I wish it was McDonald's, but it's not McDonald's. We've got something equally as big that we're working on at the moment. And
Yeah.
so we've actually go out there and start to have conversations with key people to say, if this happens, how quickly could we move? And yeah, and you talked before about a founder, like strategy is a key part of it. Like you've got to set that vision, the mission, and the purpose, but you've also got to be ready. You got to be ready for anything. And if COVID 2.0 come back in tomorrow, are you ready? Do you have the right systems and processes in place? Do you have enough cash? Do you have support networks? Is your product going to survive? And there's a whole raft of things we need to be aware of. And unfortunately, when it comes down to being a CEO and a founder in a business, particularly in a startup, the head in the sand mentality is more prevalent than we would like, and we'll deal with it comes, and that's all good and well. And I think we touched on earlier, you can only control what you can control, but you also do need to have a think about some of those scenarios. If it did play out, how would it affect your business? And I'm a big believer. I use this analogy a little bit where it's like walking on top of Mount Everest, and to your left, you've got the sheer drop down to certain death. And then you look over to your right, and you've got a sheer drop down to your certain death. And you have this little 6-inch road in front of you that just one step at a time. And at any stage, you could trip and fall to your death. And to me, that's how my startup journey feels like. And it still feels like that now, even though we've just raised some cash and we've got some really good clients coming on board. I think that mentality of always being nimble, being the ability to don't take things for granted is really important.
Yeah, you're spot on. And being the scout, be prepared concept, as you say, Cash, but the other thing you've already mentioned is having the right people and having the right people ready to come on board when you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you reckon is the best advice you've ever received?
Look, for me, it's yeah, don't sweat the small stuff. Like the sun will rise tomorrow kind of scenario. Look, I actually live my life massively by this, not just in work, but in personal side of things. Where if I'm worrying about something now, in 10 years' time, is it actually going to be something I even remember? In 1 year's time, I'm going to remember it. So don't stress about it too much. Things will pan out fairly well as long as you just keep doing the right things and being a good person and so on and so forth. I think that really plays into the fact of a lot of the stuff you stress about and worry about just will never eventuate. So just don't give it the headspace.
Yeah, really good advice. Thank you. Your biggest, we may have covered this already, but your biggest learning as a business owner?
The biggest learning is probably think big. Like when we went through COVID, we were in all sorts of trouble through COVID. And at the time, I saw my Red Rooster restaurants. So it's a double whammy of life's a bit shit at the moment. But on the other side of COVID, we knew if we kept our gunpowder dry, good things would happen. And we actually won the 7-Eleven contract only a couple of months back after COVID came out.
Wow.
And that's 750 stores throughout Australia. It was a multi-million-dollar account. I never would have thought we'd have gotten that account in the COVID years. And even coming out of COVID, we just wanted to get momentum and start building up. And to have our first big account come in straight away, it just goes to show that, anything can happen. And the amount of doors that's opened for us internationally has been just massive. And so think big because often the way people think at the moment isn't usually big enough.
Great advice. Pivoting a little bit, what do you reckon is the most important characteristic of a great leadership team?
Look, I think integrity is a big one. Being honest with yourself and with your team. There's an old saying that shit flows downhill, excuse the language. But if the team themselves they're not in a great mindset and they're not focused and they're not doing good integrity things throughout the day, that'll start to flow downhill, and the rest of the team will pick things up. And unfortunately, that just breeds toxicity, I think, within a brand. So integrity to me just means being honest and doing what you say you're going to do. So that's a big one. The other one within the team, I think, as well, is the ability for the no triangles. And when we say no triangles, it's the whole if you've got a challenge or got a problem with someone, go directly to that person and talk about it. Don't moan about them to someone else. And then suddenly you've got this triangle thing happening. And the moment you get rid of that triangle mentality, it's incredible how things move forward a lot quicker. The whole festering side of things, if things aren't right and blowing things out of proportion. And when you've got a hybrid working model like we do, where people are working from home and they're conversing like we are now today on Zoom, you don't pick up all the mannerisms, all the traits. Sometimes context can be taken out of view. And so I think the idea of not necessarily over communicating, but be more authenticity around the communication piece that you're doing is really important.
Excellent. I love the triangle model. Yeah. And the removal of friction rarely happens, unfortunately. One of the questions I get asked all the time is what resources or tools do you recommend? Books, podcasts, tools. Yeah. Anything you recommend people check out?
Unfortunately, I can't give you much advice on books. I've been dyslexic my whole life, and I've never read a book in my life. And so I love the concept of it, but when I look at my podcast list, it's pretty detailed. So I'm big on audiobooks, huge on podcasts, even just little snippets each day. I really get into sort of standard stuff in Australia, like Money News or the Fin Review, so keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening. The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, I find that really powerful and really good. And then something bigger, more lengthy, is the Acquired podcast.
Which one?
Acquired podcast by Ben Guilford and David Rizanoff, I think it is. But they break down businesses. They did one recently on Apple, on the Mars company, and they really give you some insight to how businesses are created and some of the peaks and troughs that things go through and businesses go through. Yeah, I get a lot of value out of those, but I'm a huge audio person. I won't watch much TV. I won't listen to too much music. I'll just be listening to audiobooks and podcasts it's my thing.
Yes. Thank you. It's interesting how many seriously good entrepreneurs are dyslexic.
Yeah.
Richard Branson. That's a really interesting trait that I don't know why. Is it that it leads to, it's obviously a different way of thinking.
I'll tell you what, I actually wasn't diagnosed until my mid-20s.
Right.
All through school, I achieved academic awards and other bits and pieces. And I always found it hard to read. There was always a struggle. But I'm really glad I didn't know I was dyslexic through those formative years because it never gave me a reason to not achieve things. It was
Yeah.
just didn't know about it. And I actually went through this exercise with my daughter and we got her tested and we decided not to, either way, we weren't going to tell her the results and it was just leave it between us. And yeah, I don't know. I see it as a bit of a superpower, to be fair.
Yeah.
Just means other parts of your vocabulary or parts of you as a person involves and
Yeah, no,
others.
no, just so I just mentioned it because, in fact, entrepreneurs generally tend to be somewhere on the spectrum, it would seem. And then you've got the couple of these really big names. I think Elon Musk is dyslexic, I think.
Okay.
I may be wrong. Anyway, thank you for sharing on that. Last question. Any last parting words of advice for business owners looking to grow? And one thing to encourage them to focus on.
Look, I think it's for me, I've certainly taken this philosophy of and the whole Nike mentality of just do it. I touched on before when we first started Squizify. As an entrepreneur, you need a high degree of confidence and get up and go and a can-do attitude. But you also have a big degree of naivety. And if you knew how hard it was before you started, you'd never get into entrepreneurship. And running your own business and particularly running your own startup, it is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I've also enjoyed the process every step of the way. And I think that the ability to know it's going to be hard, it's going to be challenging, but doing it anyway. And there's that quote that goes around called the man in the arena. And I'm a huge advocate of that. I'd rather get in there and try it and fail miserably than not try at all. And I think most entrepreneurs are wired that way. And to be fair, the stats are against us. There's such a small percentage of entrepreneurs actually become financially successful, but along the journey, you learn a hell of a lot of stuff. And I know because if I stop tomorrow, the amount I've learned over the years gives me such a strong advantage moving into the next phase or next project or whatever it might be. The top 2 inches, I think, is where the value sits. And so don't get caught up in the metrics around how successful you are compared to your competition. I think that's such a dangerous position to get into. Just be the best at what you can do, think big, and take action and get in there and get it done. And it seems simple, and to be fair, it actually is. It's just for some reason there's blockers out there that stops people from moving forward. And I think a good entrepreneur sees those blockers, understands them, and doesn't care, moves forward anyway.
I agree, but can I also reinforce something you said earlier about going deep and being really focused? One of the things about entrepreneurs, and I certainly find it, is that the shiny object syndrome. We take on too much and try and do too much, where what you've been doing, which is going ultra deep on your specialization, obviously is working a treat. And yeah, not being distracted. I think Steve Jobs made it was a cracker quote, a line, which was our strategy is working out what not to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, Jonathan, it's given us the ability to get into some really big enterprise opportunities.
Mm.
And if we were more than just food safety and we did other things, suddenly we become that jack of all trades, master of none status. And yeah, look, we've doubled down on it. It was right from day one. We've really had this approach of being quite deep. And the great thing about food safety in our space anyway is that the physics and the principles of food safety are the same universally.
Yeah.
So the problem we're solving here in Australia is the same problem we solve over in Thailand or Japan or the US. And so if we just get really good and become world class at solving that specific problem, it's incredible how many doors that opens up. And if we bring AI into the mix and start to double down on the data management of that, so still staying purely in the food safety space, but being able to give them, we've got billions of data points in our system at the moment, and there's gold dust sprinkled across all of that in regards to how do we move the needle for our customers on profitability, performance, CapEx down the track, and requirements that they'll need to grow their business. All that data is sitting there. And so it's really interesting. It's very exciting for us to see how we can use that to then improve our customers' businesses.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think about past customers of mine, my muscle chef and my local foodie, and like the separate thing. I'll work out an introduction to you because
Thanks.
how would add value to your business, to their business, would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Daniel, listen, thank you so much for taking the time. Number one, I've enjoyed the conversation enormously, but you pulled out some fabulous learning, so I appreciate it.
No, not a problem. Anytime. Thank you.
Great, thank you.